Welcome to the Dunning Africa Center, a collaboration between research institutions, universities, and businesses to study the impact of globalization and international business from an African perspective. Your platform, your voice, and your opportunity to shape the untapped potential across Africa. Together, we are asking tough questions, sparking conversations, and igniting change to reposition African business as a significant and dynamic global player. Today, we shift our focus to the central theme of this month's webinar, a focal point that will be the heart of our conversation. Our distinguished panelists and hosts are drawn from across Africa and work in business, academia, and government. Dunning Africa Center, it's not a place, it's a continent-wide conversation. Join us every month as we cover the pressing questions facing African businesses today.
Welcome to after our break during the summer, welcome to the Dunning Africa Center webinar series. Very excited to be back. We had a fairly long summer here in the north of the northern hemisphere. In the south, I understand you've had a mild winter. Delighted to be back again. This is the Dunning Africa Center, and on this occasion, I have the pleasure of organizing a webinar in conjunction with my colleague Bernd Vogel from the Henley Center for Leadership. And they've also set up a Africa operation. And this is, in a way, we are bringing our energies together to focus on the same set of issues. The issue here, of course, is trying to bring voices or draw voices out from Africa, which address questions that are important across the continent. And not just for the continent, because there are lessons to be learned from Africa for others and vice versa. So this is a meeting place. This is a central, like a big tree where we all come under and we talk once every month and we exchange ideas. So welcome to this session. Now, this time we have got the discussion is really connecting development issues with businesses. We know Africa is full of entrepreneurs. We know Africa is full of people with ideas. But we also know Africa is full of people with problems in terms of basic needs. And, we have in some parts of Africa, 80% of the population is informal sector. In some areas, we have a high level of poverty where people can't meet their basic needs in terms of electricity, of water, of food, and so on. Now, at what point in time do businesses matter? How should businesses act in this regard? Should businesses engage with the problems of society? Are businesses about making money, or are businesses about changing society? Now, some argue, as I suspect some of our speakers today will argue, that actually it's both. And I'm going to be here to listen and learn on how these dual objectives can be achieved. So now I'm going to pass the mic over to Bernd, and he will tell us a little bit more about this and introduce the speakers. Over to you, Bernd.
Yes, also a warm welcome from my side. My name is Bernd Vogel, and thank you, Rajneesh, for giving us this opportunity, as the Henley Center for Africa, to join basically forces and get into this conversation that's broader maybe than usual, but within the same ethos and idea. And it's a real privilege to have the opportunity, to engage mutually with the Dunning Africa Center on this fascinating, challenging, demanding topic. And again, I really like to highlight to the idea that this is a conversation that, comes from an African perspective, but the real idea is, how can we learn globally from these conversation practices, ideas, challenges, and take this word out there, which is also reflected in our audiences. So I'm really, privilege to be part of this today. I'm a professor in leadership. I run our Henley Center for Leadership in the UK, but also now for a good half year, we've established a second group here in out of Africa, which is a real gigantic learning point for us as a mutual, multiple directed network of ideas practices. So thanks for having us in your monthly series. It's a huge honor. And today, like you say, we look at the question of basic human needs and this and what leadership businesses, leading leadership development can do, cannot do, can engage, cannot engage, and that feeds into the philosophy of our group to say that we are interested in recognizing, finding, developing further, maintaining great leadership practice for optimistic leadership, for positive leadership, but also for things that matter. And hence this theme that matters, right? And here, but in various different ways at this global scale as well. So that's what we like to engage in a in-depth conversation between our with our panel members. And so how we do that, we'd like to ask every panel member to introduce themselves briefly, but then also start with a statement immediately to get us going, and thinking why they think that this idea about focusing on basic human needs might be important for businesses, and so to already get into the depth of this and start creating a generative conversation amongst ourselves. So I would like to start and invite Tabisili really to start us off. It's a pleasure to have you here. She's a Executive Vice President, and in stakeholder relations. But please share more about yourself, but also, an initial statement why you think that topic is really pressing.
Good day. Thank you so much, Bernd, for the opportunity. My name is Tabisili Pumo. I'm Executive Vice President for Stakeholder Relations and Social Sustainability at Sibanye-Stillwater. I'm also heavily involved with corporate communications work, having been the president of the Public Relations Institute of Southern Africa and currently an executive committee member for the World Communication Forum Association. So why does it matter? My simple statement is no country, no business. And really that is the premise upon which we need to frame the conversation in a context that companies find themselves operating in an ecosystem. So when you talk about corporate citizenship, the operating word there is citizen. And so if a business is a citizen in a context in which it finds itself, it should matter for it to create stability in that context, because if you begin to do that, it becomes it becomes clearer, it becomes a key business strategy that enables you to, one, secure your business strategy, but also unlock the potential for growth in the context in which you find yourself. So that, in a nutshell, is what I would say it matters, because without stable countries, there are no stable businesses. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And already quite a number of arguments out there and big questions, right? Which people might attend to. Thank you so much for coming and kicking us off. I'd like to go to Grant Kelly. Grant joins us from Nedbank. And Grant, tell us a bit about yourself. And again, why personally this matters for you, so that we hear already a bit of your view on these matters.
Thanks, Bernd. As you mentioned, I work in the office of the Chief Operating Officer at Nedbank. I wasn't going to mention my organization's name because I must state I'm here in my personal capacity as a passionate citizen of South Africa and a concerned citizen about issues of intergenerational stability. I suppose for me, I find the question a fascinating one. Throughout the history of Sapiens, corporates have always had to have a purpose to get a license. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that their purpose was a benevolent one. In many instances, through the colonial era, the purpose of corporates was to fulfill the colonialist ambitions of their host home nation. But corporates always had to have a purpose. The theory of profit being a key driver of a corporate, or the purpose of a corporate, is a very, very new one in the history of Sapiens. In fact, it's about to turn 53 on the 13th of September, when Milton Friedman published his article in the New York Times in 1970. And so it's a very recent concept that profit is a key driver. I suppose for me, I just want to amplify the points that Thabisile made. If you look at Mars, I think Mars is a very good example, is without a society, there isn't an economy. And then there's a further thing, that without an environment that is supportive of life and a society, there isn't a society. And so if you look at, often, it is the whole landscape of sustainability and purpose is presented in three Venn diagrams of economy, of society, and of environment. And the overlapping where those three Venn circles overlap is the sweet spot of sustainability. And I suppose increasingly it's clear that without a sustainable environment, there aren't sustainable societies. And without sustainable societies, there isn't an economy.
Thank you, Grant. That's really helpful. Another, already, we go into profit, we go into intergenerational stability, right? And the question often moving us from the here and now, really, to see how things are dependent and building on. So thank you so much for taking us there as the starting point. Let me turn to Brian Mlanga, as well, and active member of the Henley Center for Leadership Africa, but also in his own capacity, a real expert around diversity, inclusion, equity, equality question. And Brian, tell us a bit about you, but also your initial statement. Why you think this theme, is for you personally important.
Great. Good evening. And thank you for the honor. Thank you for the privilege of being on this platform. So my name is Brian Mlanga. I currently work and practice as a DEI specialist. I work in the work of transformation and all throughout the whole value chain of transformation, economic transformation, social transformation, and all its other nuances. In addition to that, I'm faculty in 4 business schools around Johannesburg. We won't name them, but over and above that, I'm a researcher actually for the Henley Leadership Center in Africa. I'm one of the the few the newbies on the block. And my area of interest has been around leadership and leadership around the continent. I also work as a leadership development coach. I coach in a lot of blue chip companies right now. And I really emphasize my work around social justice. And the question is why, right? My context really shapes what I do and my positionality. I'm a Black male who is in South Africa, which has a history of apartheid, right? And many people say 30 years into this new dawn, into this new democracy. And people say, should we still be talking about apartheid 30 years after the new dawn? Well, yes, we should be talking about it. And I'll tell you why, because this informs my answer to the question. Because what was fundamentally wrong with apartheid 30 or 50 years ago has not been resolved. So yes, we do have the democracy in South Africa. Politically, we're free, but economically, we are not free. And I'm going to use we in the sense of people of color or Black people. So the structures in our society that were meant to perpetuate privilege and supremacy are still present. They exist in our arts, in our culture, in our education, in business, and in all the other spheres. And therefore, I'm coming from a perspective that actually says, the whole political apparatus that we have right now in our country has been unable to deliver us from that indignity of, number one, poverty, underdevelopment, and undereducation. And therefore, perhaps business to some extent is going to help us transform and actually have more social inclusion and cohesion. That's me.
Thank you, Brian. Again, massive themes, massive terms, and some not controversial, but demands in a way, right? How to move things. So thanks for kicking us off. Now I've left Gidi to the last for one reason, because she said when we sat down, what do we do? This is what we want to do, right? This is interesting. This is burning, right? And so kind of you should be in my seat and really coordinating, but we want you as a strong voice, right? So thanks for bringing this theme to us and saying let's focus on this. So welcome to the panel as well, Gidi Mahaba. If you also say a few words about yourself, also a member of our Leadership Center in Africa, but a few words, and then so why did you bring us together, right? That's over to you.
Sure. I was hoping you want to expose that I'm the one who brought this forward, but there we are. So familiar faces here. Absolutely grateful for everyone for accepting the challenge to talk about what some people will say uncomfortable. But I want to bring it to me personally as CD, outside the member of the Research Center at Henley, and the coaching and other things that I do. I also recently joined a company that works in the Pan-African space. We'll talk about them later. But I am a daughter, 41 years old, a daughter of a single mother, domestic worker out in Limpopo. Those who are not familiar with South Africa, Limpopo is a province up in the north. So if you look at the map of South Africa and you look up there's a province called Limpopo, where growing up and sleeping with an empty stomach was not a foreign concept, and is still not a foreign concept now. But what I want to say helped me, and it sounds even wrong for me to say what helped me, was the looking forward to something outside that community. And my mother, as somebody who hasn't gone to school, said to me, the only way she knows how to get me out of that is if I go to school, right? Now I go to school, I graduate, but I graduate as someone who does not have full comprehension of what I was taught, basically. I think if I was to go into the modern school now, I would be called dyslexic or something like that. I only learned how to read and comprehend English in my career. And if I can mention Jenny Cruz Williams, whoever, if you know her or you see her, tell her that she raised me from 702, because started listening to the radio. It's a talk radio band. You don't know that talk radio station. Started listening to it. Got good referrals to books. That's how I started reading books. I can tell you, just to grab this book. Sorry, you won't see me. So a book this size would have taken me 3 months to finish. That's how much I battled. But now I can take it if I concentrate 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending. So, but what I want to come to the basic needs and the reason why the challenges or the resolution of the basic needs will not come from one sphere, not just parents, well, communities, of course. I mean, we come from, we know that, Mutuki Mutukabato, we know that Ubuntu, I am because you are, we know that. But also the businesses are very fundamental in ensuring that the cities of this world, as they learn, as they go to fetch water, as they go or gunning for, as little as electricity, there's quality in that. And I'm emphasizing deliberately the word quality, because as much as I went through school and graduated, there was no quality in that. And so it was just the rhythm that I went through. And how do we then, as corporate citizens and government and community, begin to collaborate at the level of quality so that the product, be it water, be it education that we give to the community. Tabisile and all my colleagues here mentioned that there's no business without community, but there's also no value in just doing and getting into the rhythm of applauding and cutting the ribbons and kissing the babies. And, there's no benefit in doing that if we don't dwell into the quality of what we are doing and the outcomes of that. So that is why this issue is very important to me. And that is why I wanted to come to this tree and talk about it and say, how do we bring that quality?
Now, thank you so much, and thank you for taking us through this. Why this is such a pressing issue for you personally, and where you see the roles and this idea of quality, in not just doing, right, which is probably something that particular businesses might even face if they're actually doing quality, but they might be just seen as doing, right? There might be counter argument in there because some of what has been done has just been surface, So I think that there's something to it. So thanks for kicking us all off. And so we look at business leadership, why we do things, but also how we do things over time. But I'd like to hand over to Rajneesh and come in with a further discussion point, and then please point to the person that you'd like to invite to or keep it open.
Thank you. Now, I should mention, for those of you who are new to the Dunning Africa webinars, is my interest and my research is about development and how foreign investment, how firms affect economic development. And I've been studying this for 30 years now. Now, as I mentioned, for those of you who know me, actually, I grew up in Nigeria. So I have a slightly different reference point than the South African one. And in my career, I've worked in places like Bangladesh and India and Tanzania and so forth. So I've been around a bit. So one of the things that really always surprises me is when people say that businesses are important to help with basic needs and development. Then the question comes is, what about the role of the state? Because, after all, firms should not be responsible for picking up the pieces of a failed state. Now, this may be the case in Nigeria, for instance, where the government is, frankly, and I can say this honestly, because I have a fair amount of knowledge of what I'm saying, the government is falling apart. It's completely not fit for purpose. And so there I see where the companies then have a responsibility to take care of infrastructure, take care of basic needs, take care of things that for which one elects these politicians to do. But how far should one go? Are we going to replace the public infrastructure that people ostensibly pay taxes for and hand it over to private firms to do? Is this really a practical solution? Are we going to give these big firms, because they will get larger, they're making lots of money, and of course, firms are interested in becoming monopolies. Their main goal, frankly, I know, Grant, you're very optimistic that the world will become a place where everyone wants to share, but that's not true. In fact, historically, mankind has been capitalist. They have been exploiting each other for hundreds of years. I don't need to go through that. So the point here is that left to their own means, the average capitalist, average businessman is looking to maximize their profit. If he leaves something out for other people, it's often because he's God-fearing or he feels that he will get good karma or something, there's some reason, or, okay, you train people. So, like Sidi was saying, okay, people identify you, find you, say, okay, let me nourish you because I know you will be an important asset to my business. So it's worth my trouble to do so. But how far does this go? And that's my question that I want all of you to, I'm going to bring this up because in the end of the day, I've never seen too many businesses that are actually that warm-hearted and that generous unless there is something for them in the process. So let me start with Sidi because I was quite moved by your comments.
Yeah, thanks. I think what you're raising is very important, right? And is the essence of these societies that have created the us and them. So the us and them has created or led to the collapse that you see in the society. So the business will say, how much can I get out of this community? But it's exactly that which leads to the disgruntlement within the communities where the gaps between the haves and the have not continues to grow. Right. And so whether it has been done for however long in the system, it doesn't mean that it must stand, because we're seeing the collapse of it everywhere. Go everywhere where you see civilization, or you see, the economic activity starting to grow, and see the collapse in the communities, because we focus on the us and them, right? What do I get out of that? So as much as businesses exist to create and to make profits, I also want to have and to make as much money as I can. But the moment I go home, let me tell you, I still go home. And for the purpose of the audience here, I won't use a lot of the local terms of my home language, because I'll lose everyone. But so in every, let's say, long weekends in the Easter holidays or December, we go home, right? And there's this backlog on the traffic. Either I'll talk about Limpopo, because that's where I go. Whether you take to a different province, it doesn't matter, because everyone has migrated and came to where the economic activity is. When we get home, there's this heart-burning poverty that you are faced with, right? Where every cousin and every friend that you left home is asking you for that 10 rand or whatever much, or the clothes, because we left them there and we went to make the profit. So as much as we're gunning for the profit, we are eroding that possibility of generational wealth. Because I can't be the only one at home who's working and making money and leaving everyone. We are creating this perpetual cycle where we're eating from hand to mouth. And that's where, for me, it is not about how long and how far. Because how long or how far do you raise your child, right? And if we bring it to that, we will see that is as long as it takes us to get there.
Can I comment briefly?
Please.
I love listening to Brian, and Brian, I'm really keen to connect with you after this. So I suppose Brian was talking about the legacy of apartheid. I think it's much worse than that. It's the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. And colonialism was like 300 years, and then 50 years of apartheid, and then so it's been like centuries. The issue is the way that the global economic system has been set up is extractive, exploitative, and exclusive. Now, I'm happy to have a debate with anyone about that, because I know that's a sensitive issue. But the way global economic systems are set up, extract, exploit, exclude, particularly Western-centric paradigms. And so, Rajneesh, if you look at South Africa, we're a very individualistic, Western-centric paradigm. Now, Ubuntu, I am because you are, is absolutely a collectivist paradigm, and that's much more common in Africa and Asia. And those systems are much more stable and likely to succeed going forward than I think the Western individualist ones. You look at America, the biggest economy in the world, and personally, I think that's a poor show. Okay? And it's a system that is at war. It's a system that's at war with itself, and it's absolutely not sustainable. If everyone lived the quality of life of the average American, we need 5 Earths. We don't have 5 Earths. Okay? And so, for me, the issue here, when you say everyone wants to make more money for themselves, I think that's a bit of an indictment on sapiens. I don't think it's true. But I do think that a lot of people do feel and behave like that. My experience is those people are generally more successful in the corporate landscape. The only challenge with that is there is a real risk of making as much money as you can for yourself, and the impact that you have on the overall system, and whether that system is sustainable both for yourself, your children, and your grandchildren. If I look at the South African environment, I don't think our system is intergenerationally stable. So why don't I want to make as much money as I can? I want the best future for my children to be in this country. And I know that the best future for my children is at risk unless we address the issue that Brian touched on called social justice. And to create social justice, we're going to have to create equal economic opportunities for all. And we're going to have to create an economy that is environmentally sustainable. It's not just pillaging resources. It's a circular economy. And that's transitioning. And for me, the key issue here is it depends on your perspective and your timeline of how you understand and where you're focusing your efforts. Are you focusing on me right now, which is unfortunate because I think that's, part of the challenge we have with leadership in this society? Or are you looking at how do we create social justice? How do we create social cohesion? And how do we create a society where everyone has the genuine equal opportunity of being their best self? I'll stop there.
Okay. Now, can I just interject here before Brian? Brian is very excited, and I want to interrupt here a little bit, because I'm not entirely certain that the place we want to go to today in the hour and a half is how do we completely revolutionize all society. We have a much more modest objective here. We are looking at how businesses can and should or are able to realistically, not in an imaginary future, which, Grant, I'm happy to dream about utopia. I'm happy where we have everybody equal. I'm happy where everybody develops their own form of capitalism. But that is not today. And that is not this year. And that is not the next 10 years. People can work on that on the side. But today, our goal is to talk about how, given the system we have, and without an uprising of the masses, how are we going to adapt the existing system? And how is it possible for firms and entrepreneurs in our existing system to offer assistance in terms of basic needs while being in business, if you see what I mean. So now I turn to Brian. Within that context, Brian, I'm giving you an envelope here.
Yeah, so Rajesh, I hear what you're saying, but what's coming up for me right now is how can we as people, and I'm speaking based on my positionality, given where I am now in the global south right now, how do we depend on people whose sole intention, sole project in life is pursuit of money for money's sake to transform anything, especially in my context here, which is similar to my sister who just mentioned about Tsidi. We can't. Their sole project in life is pursuit of money for money's sake. And I want to make the second point that I want to make is in the history of capitalism and its development, especially if you look at it in Euro-America, there is no single developed country that has developed by putting its faith in the pursuit of profit for profit's sake. That's a fact.
Okay, we'll have to disagree on that, but let's move on to
absolutely. So I think I like to come. So there's two layers to this conversation, right? For me, one is a system level layer, and challenge, and there's a position that's what we need to do, and there's the question. Well, even if we can't, if we don't want to, there's disagreement, which is great. So what can and should businesses as entities, but also you as individuals in your businesses, what can you do, right? And I think that can again go both ways. So I like to bring Thabisile back in. She has been quiet, after we listened, to this, and I actually think. That this is actually an important debate, and who knows whether, and I'm aware that businesses engage actually through my research into fundamental question around systems. Going back to you, your organization or yourself, Thabisile, you heard the positions. Do you get in as a business? Do you personally get in as a quite an influential person in your organization?
Yeah, I think having listened to everyone, it is becoming evident with the emergence of stakeholder capitalism that businesses are beginning to recognize that you cannot be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. And that realization is what is reshaping businesses right now to begin to focus in earnest on the sustainability agenda, whether you call it the ESG agenda. But to the earlier question that then says, how can business get involved? truth is businesses are there to make the money. And I think that there's merit in them doing that, because that money can then be used to unlock some of the basic needs that we are talking about today that need to be addressed in all the contexts that we're operating in. What has shifted is business realization that if there's no water for the society in which you operate, there's no water for the business. I mean, Eskom is a good example, which has taught all of us that I think maybe 20 years down the line, business, all of us were just blinking when the Eskom was collapsing, because we did not recognize that our progress is intertwined with the success of an Eskom, is intertwined with the sustainability of the environment in which you operate from a water perspective. And if you even look at climate change, our vulnerability as a country, and I'm talking South Africa now, to respond to adverse climate change conditions will affect business, equally affecting those who are impoverished in the context in which you operate. And so business has begun to reset. So what can it do, in my view? Business normally houses the technical expertise that are required to unlock government's ability to provide better services. And I think that's where we need as business to begin to get involved. We can also begin to move, and Tsidi's points are quite clear, where in a context, and Brian, in a context like South Africa, the issue of access to services, and this could be, and I give an example of access to education, where we need to begin to question, do we move from access as a business to move to quality of education, to move to the fit for purpose type of education? Because if you look at improving schools in South Africa and you are business A, educating that one child, that is your potential employee, that's a potential customer, that is your potential supply chain provider, but also that's a potential innovator to reset your business to be fit for the future. So I think the mindset is slowly shifting. There may not necessarily be a critical mass of businesses that are beginning to see the change, but I think some of these things need to start, as you said earlier, in small doses, because success begets success, so that we begin to see ourselves as a part of the problem and part of the solutions that we need to do for the context in which you operate. Now, should business replace government? Definitely not. Should business be in the business of making money? Definitely yes. But there needs to be a collaboration between business and government in making for better ecosystems that will be beneficial for both business and the countries that they operate in a long term.
That's fascinating. So can you? I'd like to stay with you, and can you share a bit, if you wanted, how that works in your environment, in practical, small steps? How do you, and I appreciate this is, small steps, success begets success. How does it work if I would work for your organization, or your ecosystem? What are the things that are moving? What is practically happening? What can I, as a manager, leader, whatever the terminology is, do, and what works?
Look, and I'll focus both on history based on where I come from and what my organization is doing at the point. I mean, if you recall, a couple of years ago, Anglo American in particular, which is where I used to work, used to actually intervene in municipalities, which in the South African context, which have collapsed. I mean, they used to send in engineers, finance managers. They got involved in construction of big projects in areas in which they operated, with two objectives. Firstly, to make sure that the services are there, but secondly, to also capacitate those contexts to be able to continue with the services long after they've left that. And so in my current context, we've actually put our statement publicly that actually we want to support municipalities. We want to get in, not to replace them, but to create the capability for the municipalities to start doing what they are supposed to do, because we don't have a shortage of money. We have the shortage of skills to be able to unlock the money that exists to be able to deliver those services that the communities in and around the areas in which you operate are yearning for, and that are critical for the sustainability of that environment. So that collaborative approach without replacing, because also when you create the next portion, the capability of civil society to be able to drive their own development, but most importantly, hold these governments to account. Because I think and Brian so nicely outlined it, that our history has been unfortunate in that inequality agenda, people are not able to participate meaningfully in civil society issues. They're not able to participate meaningfully in the economy because of the exclusion and the lack of understanding of the language of civic education and the language of the economy. So when you begin to capacitate society through educating children, and you move from access, because, and again, in the South African context, we do have enough schools, but the quality of education cannot take us to where we want to go. So if you begin to look at education as a developmental intervention, you then begin to structure it, and the private sector has the resources, has the skills, has the expertise to begin to help government re-engineer the education that will put the young people in our system today in line with the economies that these big companies are beginning to drive. We talk about the skills shortage. It's not because people are not being educated. They're being educated in the wrong things because the business is not coming together with government to say, these are the skills that are going to drive the economy. And therefore, can we help to catalyze those skills? Government, do your role. We will bring you the expertise to be able to be on the right trajectory towards that integrated development that will eventually make sure that we've got a stable country, because a stable country makes for stable businesses, and it's sustainable for economic growth, whether you are a socialist or you're a capitalist.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Zooming in into really how we, what can we do? Now, apologies that the light went out, but it's part of our theme of basic needs. As for those who are not in the South African context, and I had to learn that as a Northern Hemisphere person, that either phase had started or ended. I've never keep track, but basically, it's the part of load shedding and low capacity electricity, which kind of intervenes. So apologies that the light is out, but that's the reality that's where we look at, needs. And when I go back from my work here and explain to my children that the electricity is gone, right? They think, well, that's astonishing, right? As a pure fact, and that's part of this set of basic demands. I like to go back to a grant at that moment and really go, yes, you played, and Brian as well, as system change, rattling the cage, and I'm probably, I see that and we see that. But I'm also interested, it's not the only lever that we have, right? So what are things that, from your experience, that businesses, individuals, and organizations can do to address very specific questions about basic human needs, right? And it's not in either or. It's not saying I dequalify the bigger question, right? It's not at all. But at the same time, sometimes people don't have the courage to go into that direction. But still want to get engaged, and hence, what can businesses or individual managers, employees do, in your view, to shift the dial then?
Yeah, thanks, Bernd, for the question, because that's actually what I'm spending all of my day job focus on. So just to Rajneesh's comment, I've got to say that there's a wonderful Albert Einstein quote who says, "The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking." And so when we have a perspective of the big, large corporates are going to dominate the world agenda, etc., I suppose for me, my question is that just how we've been taught and the paradigm that we've got, or are there alternatives? And in India, there's a wonderful example of Amul. Amul is a cooperative that is owned by 3.5 million small-scale rural dairy farms. And Amul was created by a community of people who saw the British dominated the Indian dairy industry at the end of colonialism. When the British went into India, India was 25% of the global GDP. When the British exited, it was 3%. Okay, so obviously, the British whole agenda was not that good for Indian economy. But Amul looked at the dominance. The dairy industry was owned by British companies, and they created a co-op, co-owned by 3.5 million people. And that is an example of unlocking wealth creation for people instead of the traditional CSI, corporate social responsibility, philanthropic lens of poverty alleviation. So Bernd, to your question, I think the most effective lever to change a system is to change the paradigms that built it. And that's a Donella Meadows quote. So you can try and change the rules, and you can try and change the reporting and the data and all of that stuff. If you really want to change a system, you've got to change the paradigm that built it. And the paradigm of this economic system was a very hierarchical one, where there were a few people, big owners of capital, and they would dominate, and then they would provide jobs for the rest. And that distribution of that value, let me be clear, I'm a capitalist, explicitly. When the state owns the means of production, stuff goes wrong, okay? We've seen that. I'm a capitalist. But what I am also is I'm a social justice capitalist. The rewards of the benefit of this economic development need to be shared justly. There needs to be equal opportunities. So what can be done, Bert? Live example. There was a lady in Garankuwa with a BCom from Vista University, and she's a qualified nurse. But anyone who knows Garankuwa knows there's not a lot of going down in Garankuwa. Garankuwa was established during the apartheid system, Bophuthatswana, and hey, move a whole lot of people out of Pretoria because you can actually get welfare. You can't own property there anymore. You've got to now move to the Bantustan, as it was called. And what we'll do is we'll set up Roslyn, a vehicle manufacturing area nearby, and you can be cheap labor. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm being a bit crass, and some people might find it emotionally sensitive, but that's kind of like so. This lady in Garankuwa has got nothing to do. Okay, she gets a grant from one of our funders, and she starts using used cooking oil, recycling it, and making soap and cleaning detergents from recycled cooking oil. A German company is now interested in buying a 40% stake in her business so they can get access to the used cooking oil. The municipality wrote her a letter to thank her for cleaning up the drains in the system, because used cooking oil is now worth 6 rand a litre in Garankuwa. It goes into recycling instead of getting poured down the drain. Her business is now doing very, very well. It's profitable. It employs 9 people, and it is a blueprint of how a circular recycling economy can unlock big commercial opportunities. And this is the thing for me, the role of business is to make money. I suppose this is an interesting paradigm. I would ask, should you not make money as a byproduct of having a positive impact on society? And for me, that's the premise. Is if you're not having a positive impact on society, I think there should be regulation and laws that prevent you from making money. And if you are having a positive impact on society, you should be supported as much as you can. I don't know if that makes sense, Bert.
Thank you. No, Grant, I get your point. And your examples are nice. But, I'm from Nigeria. So I can tell you that you're assuming there's a functional government. And we do not have a functional government.
I know that system very well. I've been going there since 99, many times a year.
So what I can tell you, and I'm an advisor to the Nigerian government, and I just sort of close my eyes with shame every time I see them doing something that makes things worse. I am a socialist by background. I'm not a hardcore capitalist. I teach in a business school, but I've also become disappointed with when the government failed. You'd think that that communalism will pick up, that, we talk about this. Someone in the chat function said Africa is about collaboration and communalism, and people look after their neighbors and their friends and their extended family, as Shidi also saying, you look after everybody. When I go to Nigeria, I go with bags of stuff, I hand out to people. This is what I do. But I know that when I go home, I always see that gradually the people with money are sharing less and less, and they're becoming richer and richer. They have private jets, they have houses in London, and they are sharing a smaller and smaller percentage of their income. And this idea of communalism has slowly died. Now, there's no government to say, you should stop stealing so much money. You should stop having why do you need 3 private jets, for God's sake? This is not something, that we can do anything about. But, you are assuming that the state is functioning in a way that would act as a referee, and that requires competence, and that requires absence of corruption, and so many other things. In fact, I would love to fix the problems in Nigeria. I have no idea where to begin, which is why I'm
it's an enigma, that system.
So I think that's interesting, and helpful. And again, the question, why? So again, challenging a bit our own assumptions of how mutually helpful we are or not, right? And does that shift as well? Our underpinning ideas. I like to, what Grant you said is interesting because it refers to newly set up business, but many work in existing organizational businesses, and I like to bring the others in and think, what can people individually, collectively do within an organization, right? Where you have already things, and I know just for your personal demand for humor, right? That's probably not the way to go. But some of you who are a bit older might know a person called Rod Stewart in the UK, the musician, and he, I think last year, started to fix the potholes in his road on his own money, right? Because he was fed up and so on. But you wonder, is that the right level of intervention, right? Because it's random and so on. So, but I'm really interested in and I like to bring Chidi back in to say, so what, so from your experience, your insight, if I'm a manager, an employee, right, it's not about formality. So what can I do, right? From within, in a way, because I don't have a chance to start a business, which is one road and a really important road, but not everyone has the courage, the means, the confidence to do that, or is pressurized to do that. That's often the other way. So, and then I like to bring the other ones as well on that question.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful, and it goes back to what Rajnini is saying. I wanna connect the point. So, as a manager or as a leader, whatever the role that you have, as long as there's some means of influence and interaction that you have with government, there is an element of complacency that we have as corporate citizens, where what you're talking about, Rajnini, is around exactly when people have got two private jets, right? They're getting richer and richer, and the government is sitting back. You know why? The elephant in the room, corruption. They will not go back and nudge those people to say, you are not doing the right thing, because there's a handshake in there. And so even us, as we're sitting here, we've been in certain tables or in certain conversations, and not many of us, even in the participation in the chat, will say we've seen an element of conversation that was nudging or going towards the corruption. We either sat back or we participated one way or the other. And so what are the basic things, or some of the things that we can do? The same quality that I'm advocating for education is the same quality of conversation that we all need to bring to the table when we are conversing in our own boardrooms and with our own government, and call out what you are seeing on the table, right? All of us comes from the organizations where we've got values, we've got this, we've got that. But do we leave those values when we come to the tables and when we are negotiating the deals? Most of us, we do not. It's on paper and it's a tick box, and that is what is delaying us. So practically, let's start with the conversations that we are having, right? Are we living the values that we said we are about? And are we calling out and holding ourselves? Let's before we even go to government, as the corporate citizens, are we calling and holding ourselves accountable? If we do that, we will also reduce the level of corruption, because corruption eats away the accountability between the two parties on the table. I need to look away so that you can continue doing what I'm doing because I want the business and. So bring the quality back on the conversation, hold people accountable on both sides in your own level. And then we'll see the transformation in what we need in those, in those basic needs that we're talking about.
before I hand over, can I ask one more question? Right, I'm a relatively young employee, maybe my first management role, right? If I'm lucky, and now you're telling me I need to step up, right? The last generation hasn't stepped up, and now you want to shift that to me while I'm just happy to have my first job, right? And then I'm required to step up and be very visible, maybe challenging. Maybe I work in a purposeful business environment easier. Maybe I'm not working in a purposeful business environment, right? So how do you motivate me to do that step, right, as a practical level, so that my risk perception, right, to say, well, I put maybe my career, my progression, at risk, but actually it's a good thing, don't get me wrong, right? But I make this as a personal level, these considerations. Quick sentence. What do we recommend to do? How do I overcome that?
So there are unspoken rules in every conversations where I've been uncomfortable in my young careers before I gained the confidence and able to have these conversations. I referred it to my manager, and then, as they say, I will see, in every organization, in every system, is not, people don't do they don't follow your actions, they follow what you tolerate. So if I bring this matter to you as my manager, and your tolerance level is, go ahead with it, already I know that this conversation or this organization does not live or stand by the values that they want. And so in that moment, as a young, possibly scared, not knowing or not wanting to champion that voice, is for me to retract and allow the manager to deal with that conversation. But as some of us who gains the confidence and own the chairs that we are owning and have got the voices in the boardroom, it's upon us. I'm not saying let's transfer it to the young CD in the corporate world. I'm saying let's take it to the CDs of the world who are sitting in the, let's call it the powerful chairs, whatever that means. And then say, are we really living the conversations, or are we really living the values that we say we're living? Otherwise, this business schools that we're working at, Brent, we're wasting our time. Because the first thing that we say at this business school is that let's live the values. Let's have the boundaries. Let's have the personal values and the organizational values. And are we just coming here and writing them on the books, or is it time for this generation to bring it forward? And we no longer talk show hosts. We're doing something about it. The young ones, I was very scared. I wouldn't even be on this webinar at that time, but we gain the confidence, and it's us who needs to call that out. Tabisile mentioned the accountability. How do you account if you are not holding the values of these businesses and the personal ones that we saying we live? So that's how I will do it.
Yeah, and I think somehow the non-action becomes the risky part, right? That's how I look at that, right? The non-activity is really what makes you not progressing, engaging. I like to bring.
Sorry to cut you. Our tolerance level has become so low that we exaggerating this risk and the collapse that we're seeing in our society.
Yeah. Brian, I like to come back to you and really look at the again we look at the system level, but I also want to hear from you how you have seen and practices that managers, again, employees. I'm not a fan. Leadership is everyone's job anyway. But how can we? So what those are listening, or those want to share. What once they have listened to us with others. So what can they do? In their environment.
Yeah. So in my task as a practitioner, as a leadership development practitioner, and as an executive coach in blue chip companies, I also find and I encounter a lot of execs and a lot of leaders who find themselves in the situation that my sister Tsidi was explaining to us, where they have to choose between self-preservation and what I would call the common good. And it's a very hard dilemma. And hence and again, I can only speak to the context of South Africa and a little bit of West Africa, which I work in. But in South Africa, you can actually see that it really puts people in a very hard place, because what then happens is if you don't play the game, you get isolated. And this is actually in South Africa, we've had this thing called BEE, Black Economic Transformation, which in my opinion and in my experience of corporate and working around it has been really an absolute disaster. It has failed to transform our economy. It's become a black boys club. Actually, if you look at what BEE has produced, is we've not had any innovation coming out of that. We've not even had much development. This is exactly what Ranjesh is talking about. All it's about the Gucci bags, the private jets, and drinking champagne and all that kind of thing. And it has failed to look into social development for our countries. And I actually think it has been premised. It's a tragic loss, right? So to answer your question, which is what do we do? Look, it's not an easy one, and there's no formula here. But at some point, and so in leadership, we then have to ask, we talk about that personal mastery. And I'll talk also what Tsidi spoke about. I think business schools are also accomplices in this whole, and I'm going to say they are. And I'm part of business schools. We are accomplices in part of exploiting society. That's a story for another day. However, I want to come back to actually to this point of what should we do. We really need to be very clear. As leaders, you need to be very clear what do you stand for. As a leader, you're not there for yourself. You're there to have influence, to have impact, right? What are you there for? It's not just about the role and the title. So we need to be very clear. What legacy are we going to leave for our children? And if it's going to be a legacy of the private jets, which is very selfish, then our great-grandchildren are not going to have even the earth, because look at what our environment has come to.
Okay.
Can I just comment on that very briefly, Ben?
Yes, before we go to Thabisile as well again, but yes, please, Grant, come in.
Very briefly. So I do think business schools are complicit in this economic system, because I think they perpetuate the free market neoliberalism agenda, which is not helpful. Per the Secretary General of the United Nations, 70% of the world's populations are living in systems with rising income and wealth inequality. That was his Nelson Mandela Memorial Lecture in 2020 when he gave the COVID lecture, and he called it the inequality pandemic. What I really like about Henley, and I'm giving Henley a punch here, I love the pillars of your leadership development. It's not executive development, it's leadership development. Pillar 1, personal mastery. Pillar 2, systems thinking. Now, there's a quote from Robert Sobukwe, which I think is the best quote I've ever heard on leadership or read anywhere. It says, I'm reading just in case you're worried where my eyes are going. True leadership demands complete subjugation of self, absolute honesty, integrity, uprightness of character, and fearlessness. But above all, a consuming love of one's people. We need leadership if we want to transform our systems.
You sound like
needs to be servant leadership. Sorry, I'll stop there.
I admire the quote you have just given, Grant. But frankly, I think you're describing Jesus Christ and maybe Nelson Mandela at a pinch. But I can't think of nobody else who fits that description of selflessness that you're holding everyone to. I certainly don't. As a leader of a very small group within a very small business school, I can tell you I don't know anyone like that. I would like to know people like that. So please introduce me if you know these people. How can we create
worth inspiring? And Mandela is obviously like a role model. I don't think he's the only one, but I think he's a very good start.
I think, before I hand over, it's really interesting.
But how is it working in other countries? How is it working?
I think you turned the corner in terms of business schools, right? So I was worried, but I'm actually, it's an interesting one as let's be really honest, what our role as educators is, right? And if we're sharp enough and I think, I'm on record saying, I often wonder, we're we're a bit like the band on the Titanic, right? We play the same tunes and are asked to stay on, but the ship's sinking, right? But we love our stuff, So I'm with you. I think one of the reasons why we started the Henley Center for Leadership Africa, and in a slightly different ethos and purpose, is in a way what you're saying, to identify actually good leadership role models. And I think, and the good news is, between my colleague Rajneesh and myself, we can disagree, often enough. I think there is enough, but we're not looking sharp enough. So one of the practices to actually shift the dial is to see where is good practice, and are we talking about that, and are we recognizing that, and do then we create, instead of role modeling not so helpful leadership, managerial or business behavior, do we actually provide role models that people can orient to? And ideally, in an ideal world, not the larger than life figures, right? Because that's very difficult to relate to in your personal environment. I like to, I'd like to, go, Tabisile, if I can come back to you, right? Are you actually, and it could be yes or no, it's a, question, and I'm very happy, wherever you want to, do you actually, as a business or in your work, in your role, have any assessment or measurement where you say we were really interested how we shift some of these challenges in the one hand side around basic needs, right? How we make progress, but also secondly, do we actually somehow assess, look at, recognize when individuals, people or groups in our business are involved, right? It's not only the outcome, but do we actually look who is involved? And you could say, well, we're not there yet, or we're halfway house, who knows, right? But I'm interested how that works in your environment.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So maybe let me start with that. How do individuals get involved? I think there needs to be a recognition of the cost, the personal and the corporate cost of being wealthy in the South African context. I mean, just look at your security costs, your safety costs, and all the costs that are associated with it, which is why I'm saying we have a fertile ground or the burning platform to shift the dial and begin to have those conversations that begin to talk to even those people with 2 jets and all of those things, to just highlight that if there was stability, if the basic needs of the majority were met, they would actually have more, because of it would decrease the cost of these electric fences and inverters and all sorts of things that are as a consequence of not meeting basic needs. So that recognition in our own space, we've started a program called Employee Volunteering Scheme, where our employees are contributing both cash, time, and skills to their local contexts. So it could be, and they identify the courses within their context that are pertinent, because each context has got its own thing. So we've had people going to paint stop sign, fix roads, deal with GBV and all sorts of things. And for that, we do recognize them in terms of time recognized, and in terms of lauding them for the work that we're doing. And why that is important is every employee is a citizen of the environment in which they operate. And in that environment in which you operate, these people whose basic needs are not being met are their families, are their friends. And hence I'm saying that, yes, South Africa's problems, and even Africa, if you look at overlay colonialism on top of apartheid, are huge. However, there has to be an opportunity for us to say, let's influence it in micro contexts so that collectively these things can begin to show up in the macro environment. Because if we bemoan the past, we bemoan the challenges, and we do not act, there'll come a point where the whole system is going to collapse with all of us in it. Hence, I started by saying, no country, no business. Our progress of a community or a society is intertwined with the sustainability of any business. So it makes business sense, at least for a business in the 21st century, to begin to think differently about impacting on societal needs. So that is beginning to happen in our context. And I want to answer the next question, having looked at a question in a chat that said, we operate in contexts where the extractive industries, people are living in shacks and all sorts of those issues. It is a consequence of the fact that in South Africa in particular, but also in resource-rich countries, we've created hubs of prosperity in a sense that if I look in the mining industry, so if it was a Johannesburg, if it was a Rustenburg, if it was a Kimberley, those were the only hubs where we focused on furthering development at the exclusion of the many other areas in and around the country. So invariably, people will be drawn to those areas. And then you begin to have a Johannesburg, a Rustenburg that cannot cope spatially, cannot cope with roads, cannot cope with water needs, because then the whole country congregates to those hubs, those economic hubs. As a result, exacerbate the already existing a backlog of the basic needs that exist. So we almost need to decentralize development. To Tsidi's point, Polokwane, we must be able to look at economic activities happening in a Polokwane center, happening in Mpumalanga and all the other hubs, so that people can find value in the contexts in which they operate. Because currently our system is not sustainable. There are few economic hubs. And whether you are in Rustenburg, as the question was saying, where there's extractive industry, or you are in Captain Park, where there's a lot of companies, people are invariably going to crowd there. The Ekurhuleni or the Bojanala district is never going to cope providing basic services. There will never be enough houses. There'll never be enough water, because people have abandoned their areas of living to come to these centers of excellence. And as a result, as I said, you can't be a center of prosperity in a sea of poverty. People are going to climb into that island, and soon there will be no island for people to climb in. There'll be an inevitable collapse. And so if you talk about then what happens to generations after, I would want to believe that corporates and those rich individuals are also thinking about generations after them. It may not be something that is top of mind, but they've got children. They want to see their grandchildren grow as well. And I would want to imagine, as Tsidi said earlier, we need to start having these conversations. Yes, there's doom and gloom, but where do we start as South Africans in particular to change that narrative? And lastly, you asked what the corporate doing. I'm not sure whether you guys have heard about the involvement of business in fixing the country. They're involved in logistics now. They're involved in dealing with the issues of crime. They're involved also in dealing with issues of ESCOM, because that burning platform now exists. Government has opened up its mind. Business has also said, we are raising our hand to begin to solve the problems of South Africa. And I do hope that we will begin to be able to see tangible results out of that collaborative platform that has recently started in South Africa between business and government.
No, that's very helpful. And again, we see immediately how things need to happen at different layers, right? In what we can do. So we did a study 5 years ago in Leadership and Work 2028 with a bit of a Northern Hemisphere emphasis. And yes, the idea of purpose of a business came along, no surprise in a way, but what gave me a bit of hope and a view of momentum, that some of the most senior people in our panel understood, and kind of we heard voices like, well, in a way, the way how we run our business today, basically we destroy our business and the platform for our market's demands and everything. And if we don't change that, and there's an interesting move, I think, to go away. It's a necessary part, but it's a move away from once after your business life to come back and change things, right? In a deserved and welcome philanthropic way. But why not, being earlier in, and build that in when you have even a bigger network, and more leverage, other than when you're actually out and you kind of want to pay back your guilt. So that's quite an interesting question. Probably the most outspoken in some of the language that you also use today, but from another perspective in the North, similar questions, similar strong opinions, and that gives us and challenges a bit, the question of business only for both. I'd like to, from all of you, a quick, a short answer to something, and I will tell you what I'm up to, right? When when I took over the role to develop the Henley Center for Leadership Africa based on, out of our Johannesburg campus, I'm based in Henley in the UK. I'm a German person. I'm a middle-aged white man. I always say I'm the least person who should actually do that job, right? I'm a complete failure in terms of, in every criteria that you have, at least from Germany, not from the UK, right? But why am I interested? And why have we set this up? Because we want a multi-directional conversation, inspiration, learning from each other, right? This is a learning from Africa question. Hence, I'm here because I want to learn and then facilitate that learning, and that needs to go out into the world. And instead of only one directional, that would be mad. So I'd like to hear from you, from each of you, a short statement. Now, if you look outside Africa, be it to the Northern Hemisphere, to Asia, Southern America, Northern America, on this theme on basic needs and leadership, whether it's a system level, but ideally in a tactical level, what can the North, the globe, learn from Africa, right? To make it the other way around as the normal stream of ideas and practices. I don't know who would like to start. After a bit of thinking time, Brian, do you want to kick us off? What do you think that the countries, nations outside Africa can learn, right? Because we look inside, but it's also a learning opportunity some countries are catching up quickly with, demands on basic needs, so what can they learn?
I think there's a need for private and public partnership in terms of meeting these needs. Right? The approach that we've been having so far has been either government does it, or we actually say, no, we should relegate that to business. And there is need to see each other as collaborators in this game. So for me, that partnership is very important. But also, the West also needs to stop destabilizing our leaders. They are the ones who are giving us these jets. They isolate me and they give me all the privileges and all the benefits. And guess what? Then I give you access to my grandfather's land. That's what's happening. So can they back off?
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Grant, do you want to come in? So what can people outside Africa learn from your progress, from your challenges, from the hurdles, from the things that we do?
I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to give Steve Biko a quote here. And he says, "The great powers of the world have done wonders in giving the world an industrial look. But the great gift still has to come from Africa, giving the world a more human face." And for me, that sums it up. I think that if there was more humanity in the world, more Ubuntu, more thinking of I am because we are, and appreciation for systems thinking, our interconnectedness, and focusing on the commonness of our humanity rather than the peculiarity of our differences,
okay.
I think the world would be a much better place.
Thank you. Gidi, any thoughts on you? What can we, share as practices learning towards the global audience?
So I think there's clear, merging or mergence between, the Africa and the world. You can hardly see the difference wherever you go. I mean, you can travel to any country, you see the same multinationals that are in South Africa are out and about. So the world is becoming very small very quickly. But the uniqueness of every country remains, right? And therefore of every continent remains. And I think that's where the competitive advantage will start to resonate. So it's very important that when you walk into when you look into Africa, look into the uniqueness of that continent. I like the mission or the line for Henley when we're saying we're building the people that build Africa. I think I'm butchering it, but that line, right? So because we're building the businesses for the people in Africa, basically that's the context of it. But most importantly, let's learn that exploitation has not gotten us anywhere. right? It has actually collapsed the system, and it continues to collapse the system. And so the big word for me in this conversation is collaboration and quality, and not ticking the boxes. So if we collaborate on quality and not just tick the boxes, we will all learn a lot from each other.
Thank you. That's helpful. Who's Tabisile? Your thoughts. What should we shout out to the other countries, right? And appreciate. We often look at Africa as a completely monolith. It's obviously not how it works. There's 40, 50 plus countries. They're all different. Different voices, different challenges. Let's just make that absolutely clear. But what from us, what can we in the other countries, regions, territories learn?
Look, capitalism in its current form is value destroying in the long term. And at least we've learned some of those lessons in Africa. And that's the one lesson we would want to export to the North. But I think the most critical part, and the colleagues have mentioned it, unless there is a collaboration between society and business, we are going to be in trouble as the planet. And therefore, it is probably time for the North to realize that this Africa that they rely on for resources and sometimes skills will not be there unless they change their mindset in terms of how they're practicing their current economic policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have I overlooked anyone, in our conversation? I think everyone I asked about the last question, right? Is that okay?
Yes. You met Chidi, I think.
Chidi, we need to. Have I overlooked you, Chidi?
No, I gave my views before Tabi.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. No, I really like to thank you for our conversation today. It is often the case, that while we look at the practical and the small, the technical, right, we at the same time need to look at the system question, right? And it's this interplay. And at the same time, I think recognize, what people can do. And let's kind of go back to what we're looking at. We're looking at, people and managers and organizations, right, who try to engage, lead, make differences. And at the same time around topics that, we talk about basic human needs, that we need to talk about. That is the first, challenge. But there's pressing questions for livelihoods. And so hence again, we it's great to hear that that there is different ways of coming in, and also depends on where you are with your confidence, with your way of influencing, moving things to basically create, better livelihoods, with the various levers. So it's great to hear, and being on the really demanding side too. Well, how can we, support people who might not be in our positions, but still can contribute. And how leadership businesses can play a role. So really, thank you so much for doing this and providing these points, conversations, tactics, practices, but also real challenges, right? And it is about a challenge. So thank you for doing this with us tonight. If you like, out there in the audience to follow, more of these conversations, specifically around leadership, some already asked, can I connect? Please connect with the audio, with the speakers today, with the panel. Also connect with us at the Henley Center for Leadership Africa, myself personally, if you're interested to push these themes and forward. This is again something where we provide a platform and look for engagement for us to help us move the dial here and use our specific view on leadership, which is a very specific, part of the entire equation, but can be a powerful part. But it also only becomes a powerful part if we have diverse engagement. So reach out to us. You know where to find us. And thank you to Rajneesh to open up this monthly webinar online event to have this substantial conversation with, hopefully has created a lot of learning overall. But also, and that's kind of as people know me, but also always think about, what do you do differently tomorrow from what you've heard today? Create the footprint as soon as you can, and not just take it as a thought experiment, then we have created impact through these 90 minutes here. So thank you, Rajneesh, for opening it up for the Henley Center for Leadership Africa. And then over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I know this has been a very interesting conversation. And I know I've sounded like I'm a bar humbug, Scrooge kind of character where the world is going to end tomorrow. And perhaps it's because of the recent events or the latest election in Nigeria and what was happening. So I've been having a rough time of it, watching. So I've been involved in the recent change of government, but that's another story. The point is that I'm still here, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm hoping, against hope, that things will improve. It's true Nigeria is an outlier in many ways, but I really don't want it to be. And I look always with great hope that, so many years have passed. Every time I keep thinking tomorrow, I feel like Kafka. There is something about to change in any moment now. So, but I'm here. And the Dunning Africa Center is about hope at the end of the day. We want to exchange ideas. We want people to learn. I want to continue these conversations, and we want these conversations to happen with the Henley Center leadership, with others. Those of you who are interested, you are welcome to attend our seminar first Thursday of every month. As like clockwork, it will be at the same time, the same place. We make sure you come to it. All the videos are available of the past webinars, are available on YouTube. We have a channel. I'm sure we'll send out an email now giving you a link to where you can find these things. And we want you to, if you have ideas for other webinars, please contact us. We would be more than happy to organize themes and ideas. Just tell me. I'm just dying to engage with these issues. I know today I was sounding a bit rough on some of you. My apologies. I've learned a lot. And, maybe I'll go home and I will feel a little bit more optimistic now. And I think I think we're running out of time, and people are in South Africa. It's dinner time for you. It's past dinner time for some of you. So I'm going to let you all go. I think our panelists, if you would stay for a bit while everybody else logs off. So we have any last minute words we want to exchange amongst ourselves. But to the audience, thank you very much. See you the first Thursday of next month, where we'll be talking about ESG issues. And we have a team from Henley. We're talking about ESG adoption and strategic integration into the Johannesburg Stock Exchange listed firms. Very relevant, also connected. So looking forward to seeing you here first Thursday of next month. Thank you, everybody, and be well.
Dunning Africa Center. It's not a place, it's a continent-wide conversation. Join us on the first Thursday of every month.